Have you ever wondered why school textbooks portray the 19th century as a golden age of marvelous inventions and romantic journeys, while briskly flipping past wars as if they were just petty quarrels between neighbors? We are told that Britain fought for distant colonies, America dealt with internal disagreements, and China suffered from trade disputes. But what if this entire picture is nothing but an illusion? What if behind the bright covers, there was a single global operation stretching from 1830 to 1870? Look at the map of those years. Conflict hotspots ignite simultaneously from the Atlantic to the Pacific, as if on a signal from one central command. These were not random clashes. This was a real-world war, artificially fragmented into dozens of smaller names to cover its tracks. Who stood behind it all? Who was being liberated and rebuilt from America to China, from Crimea to Paraguay? The answer will force you to see the entire world around you differently. Let's sort it out step by step, without unnecessary words. Take the year 1848. Europe suddenly erupts in the spring of nations, revolutions in dozens of countries all at once as if on command. No one explains how ordinary people across the continent suddenly decided to overthrow kings on the same day. Then comes 1853, the Crimean War. Russia, against a coalition of Britain, France, and Turkey. Why would great powers concentrate entire fleets in the cramped Black Sea for the sake of a single city? Next, 1857, the Sepoy Mutiny in India. British troops crush a rebellion on the other side of the world. 1861, the American Civil War, North versus South, millions under arms. 1864, the Paraguayan War in South America, a small country against three giants. And in parallel, starting in 1850, the Taiping Rebellion erupts in China, claiming the lives of tens of millions. Doesn't that seem strange? The entire world is on fire within the same decade. Official books shrug. Economics here, religion there, independence elsewhere. But think for yourself. When a living room, an attic, and a basement all catch fire at the same time, do you blame old wiring? No. You realize someone set the whole house ablaze on purpose. The 19th century was exactly that arson attack on our shared history. It was a coordinated purge in which armies of a new order marched shoulder to shoulder, concealing the main objective. They were not merely fighting for land or gold. They were erasing traces of something far greater, an ancient network of cities and knowledge that stood in the way of the planet's new masters. Maps of the era still preserve hints of vast territories like Great Asia or Tartary, but these were quickly scrubbed from encyclopedias. Why? Because the truth pushes its way out, and a single glance at the dates is enough to cast doubt on everything. Now imagine opening an old atlas and seeing how the battle points merge into a single line across oceans. British ships in India, American regiments in the south, French troops near Sevastopol, all in uniforms of the same cut, armed with the same weapons. This is no coincidence. It is a global network in which every strike was part of a plan. The Taiping Rebellion in China is officially described as a peasant uprising, but the numbers scream otherwise. 20, 30, even 100 million dead. How could simple farmers with pitchforks create such a slaughter? Behind it were the resources of great powers, logistics attributed only later. The ruined cities shown in engravings were not destroyed by fires, but by something that left devastation like the aftermath of a hurricane. The same in America. The South, with its magnificent cities, was wiped off the map. Atlanta, Richmond, brick reduced to dust, entire districts burned to the ground. Field artillery of the time could punch holes in walls, but it could not erase whole neighborhoods. And Crimea? Sevastopol, with its bastions carved into solid rock, was bombarded, not to capture it, but to erase it completely. These fortresses were not mere forts, but nodes of an old system, with underground passages that could not be dug with shovels in a single year. The coalition spent tons of shells to turn them into rubble. And Paraguay, 90% of its men vanished. This was not a war. It was a plan to clear territory of its old inhabitants. All these points on the map merge into a single picture, a new order cleansing the planet of those who remembered the true past. Ancient cities hid behind official names, and armies marched in to bury them, rebuild them, and claim them. But why such fury? What lay hidden in those ruins that required a global conspiracy? The next step will reveal a logic that sends chills down your spine, because the supply of these armies shatters every conventional explanation. You have just seen how dates and maps merge into a single chain of a global plan. But let's dig deeper into these wars. Take them apart, piece by piece, and the truth will burst out like steam from under a lid. Let us begin with China, where the Taiping Rebellion from 1850 claimed 20, 30, and by some estimates up to 100 million lives. Imagine it. Simple peasants with hoes against the imperial army and Western forces. How did they manage to wipe entire provinces off the face of the earth? Engravings show ruins where stone walls are ground into powder, as if swept away by an unseen force. Officially, it was the revolt of a religious fanatic. But numbers do not lie. Such scale requires tons of gunpowder, fodder for thousands of horses, and fleets of ships. The rebels did not have this. It was a purge under cover, where Manchus and Europeans together erased traces of an old civilization, the very great Asia, that stored ancient secrets in its cities. Now let us move to America. The Civil War beginning in 1861, North versus South, supposedly over slavery. But look at photographs of Richmond, Atlanta, Charleston. Neighborhoods burned down to their foundations. Brick houses reduced to skeletal remains, as after something unimaginable. Cannons of that era could breach walls, but not level entire streets. The South was wealthy, with classical buildings, columns, domes, parks, that settlers could not have built from wagons. These cities remembered their former masters, and the Union Army came to erase them to cover the tracks. Casualty figures keep growing. First 300,000, now 1 million, and the demographic gaps are even larger. Where did the people go? They were simply removed, so new settlers without memory of the past could be placed on the cleared land. The destruction was selective. Only the magnificent. Only what cried out of antiquity. Now the Crimean War, 1853. Russia versus Britain, France, and Turkey. Why send squadrons into the narrow Black Sea for Sevastopol? Officially, for the Straits. But the fortress bastions were cyclopean, with underground labyrinths carved into rock, impossible to build with pickaxes under fire. This was an ancient node, energetic, logistical, part of a worldwide network. The coalition bombarded not to capture, but to destroy. Tons of shells to level it to the ground. Soldiers on all sides wore similar uniforms, as if they were a single unified force. They were not truly fighting each other. They were finishing off what had stood for centuries. Sevastopol fell not to assault, but to methodical erasure, so no one could uncover its secrets. And the same picture appears in India. The sepoys in 1857, Britain crushed the revolt, but destroyed not villages, rather ancient fortifications. And Paraguay, the year 1864, the peak of horror. A small country against Brazil, Argentina, and Uruguay. The result? 90% of its men vanished. Not a battle, but total cleansing. Paraguay was self-sufficient. Railroads, telegraph, no debts to London. That did not fit the plan. Enclaves of the old world were hidden there, survivors of catastrophe, with skills that frightened the new masters. The externally armed coalition simply cleared the land. Men were eliminated, women and children left for the mixing of blood. A new generation without roots. All these wars are links in a single chain. Taipings in Asia, Southerners in America, the people of Sevastopol, the Paraguayans. All were guardians of the past. Armies of the new order marched in sync, leaving ruins behind. But how were they supplied? By wagons through mud. The maps lie. Such scale is impossible without old roads. What did these routes conceal? And why are cities in photographs empty, as if after the departure of their inhabitants? Wait, this is only the beginning of the revelation. The logic of supply and architecture is about to blow your mind, because the colonizers did not build. They seized what was already finished. But now let us look into the very heart of the operation. Logistics and the stones that prevent the official story from standing upright. Imagine it. Armies of 100,000 men marching across oceans and mountains. They need tons of food, fodder for horses, gunpowder, ammunition, every single day. Officially, all of this was transported on creaking wagons, through mud, or on sailing ships fighting headwinds. But overlay the battle maps onto the terrain of the time. Chinese jungles, American prairies, Indian steppes. It is impossible. The scale of these operations shatters all templates. Without ancient roads and hubs, it would have been a catastrophe. Yet they moved in perfect coordination, as if running on the rails of an invisible network. Old routes, hidden beneath official maps, ran through Tartary, a vast land from the Urals to India, filled with cities. They were buried so that we would forget. Consider the colonial conquests. The British and the French sail to India, Australia, Africa, plant a flag, and within a couple of years build Bombay, Melbourne, Cape Town. Look at the photographs. Granite columns, marble palaces, railway stations with perfect acoustics. Convicts and soldiers with shovels accomplished this in swamps amid uprisings? No. These masterpieces had stood for centuries, standing empty after a catastrophe. The colonizers simply walked in, hung up new signs, and claimed them as their own. The destruction was selective. Only what cried out about great age was demolished. Temples with unusual symbols, fortifications of unclear purpose. The Summer Palace in China, 1860, the Anglo-French did not loot it. They burned and blew it up for weeks. Not a palace, but an archive, a repository of maps and secrets of Great Asia. They were wiping the hard drive before installing a new system. And the photographs of that era. Photography is born in the mid-century, and what do we see? St. Petersburg, Moscow, Paris, Washington, empty. Not a soul in the streets, rare figures like ghosts, long exposure. Then why are the trees sharp and the shadows even? The cities were emptied before the armies arrived. Troops entered ruins whose inhabitants had vanished earlier, after cataclysms, mud flows that buried the first floors. Cultural layers several meters thick did not accumulate over centuries. They were dumped by engineers. While regiments were finishing off resistance in the mountains, others were filling in streets in the capitals, reshaping the landscape. The ruined architecture in paintings, not fantasy, drawn from life. The world is littered with fresh debris of ancient quarters. Star-shaped fortresses like Sevastopol were not built for cannons. Their geometry is far more complex than necessary. These are schematics, circuit boards laid out on the ground, parts of an energy system. They were bombed first to cut the power. The asymmetry of conquest is clear. Nothing was built, ready-made structures were seized, cities concealed ancient functions, libraries beneath palaces, nodes beneath forts. The new owners occupied the upper floors, burying the lower levels. And the demographics afterward? Enormous gaps. But where did the armies come from? Supply chains defy logic. Without old infrastructure, the plan would have collapsed. Maps of Tartary disappeared from atlases precisely at that time. Hundreds of cities beneath the taiga await excavation. What else lies hidden beneath our feet? The technologies of destruction are about to show what caused stone itself to melt. This century is described as an age of steam and romance, but the marks left on stone tell a very different story. Fort after fort, fortress after fortress, the mid-19th century left behind not just ruins, but something like melted wounds on the body of the planet. The official version insists these walls were struck by cast-iron cannonballs fired with black powder. But in old photographs and descriptions, we see brick vitrified at the edges, granite that flowed like wax. To melt such stone requires temperatures of around 1,200 degrees Celsius or higher, and ordinary gunpowder cannot heat even the core of an explosion to such levels. These are not traces of simple artillery, but imprints of a weapon unknown to us, one that burned not only walls, but the very memory of what once stood there. The picture grows even darker when we recall the so-called Great Fires of the 19th century: Chicago, Boston, Spokane, Seattle, Moscow, Kiev. The stories repeat as if copied from the same template. A small spark, an accidental flame, and within hours entire districts of stone and brick buildings are gone. Steel flows into storm drains, stone crumbles into sand. People do not even have time to escape. This looks less like ordinary fire and more like carpet strikes, a directed impact that burns a city to its foundations. And after such catastrophes, urban layouts change abruptly. Complex radial and star-shaped street patterns disappear, replaced by straight grids convenient for control and patrols. Along with homes, libraries, archives, repositories burn. The Library of Congress in the mid-century loses 2/3 of its collection. Chronicles in Europe and China go up in smoke. It is not just books that burn. It is the instruction manual for the old world. Maps, dynasties, knowledge of free energy, of the ether, of technologies that no longer fit into the new order. A special place is occupied by the mysterious star forts. Official history explains them as fortifications designed to defend against infantry and artillery. But the geometry of these structures is far too complex for simple defensive earthworks. Rays, polygons, perfectly calculated angles, as if before us were not a fortress, but a giant schematic, a circuit board laid upon the earth. Such objects were destroyed first, bombarded until only their outlines remained beneath the cultural layer. If we assume they were elements of a unified energy network, it becomes clear why the new authorities sought to sever these nodes. At the same time, across the world, neighborhoods of uniform red brick rise everywhere. What today is called historic development is, in reality, cheap patchwork built atop cleared sites where structures of another era once stood. Population figures after all these catastrophes look no less strange than melted stone. Wars, epidemics, famine, wipe out entire regions. Official data speaks of the loss of a third of the male population in some countries, yet 20 or 30 years later the numbers miraculously double. Biology allows no such miracles. No woman can give birth to 5 children a year to compensate for such losses. So something else was happening. In the mid-19th century, huge orphanages, shelters, and training institutes appear simultaneously on all continents. Children of unknown origin, without genealogies or family archives, are brought there. They are drilled, taught obedience, stripped of memory of their roots. From them, labor and soldier masses are formed. A new people for a new world, one that does not ask unnecessary questions about where the former inhabitants went. The linguistic map also changes at frightening speed. Where once there was a single layer of speech reflected in old inscriptions and documents, dozens of literary languages and norms emerge. Dialects are unified, new alphabets introduced, grammar rewritten. People are, as it were, reflashed, divided into groups that no longer understand one another. Old gravestones up to the mid-19th century are adorned not with crosses, but with urns, inverted torches, solar symbols. These stones are mass destroyed or replaced with standard slabs. Graves are one of the few sources of truth about who lived, how long, and what they believed in. The cleansing of cemeteries proceeds in parallel with the cleansing of cities. And against this backdrop, at the end of the century, fully formed inventions appear as if out of nowhere. Radio, electricity, the telephone, automobiles. Not gradual evolution, but a sudden surge, as if someone opened a safe containing someone else's developments and allowed only the safe portion to be taken. Everything that would too clearly lead back to the former civilization was locked away or destroyed along with the melted stone of the old city.